Leeds Beckett University students, and welcome to webinar 7, which is all about the final stage interview. You can see where this slots into our webinar series. We've got 8 topics that are all related to my book From Learner to Earner, which you can see there. So if you've missed any of the previous sessions, be sure to check those out and also join us for that final session. One point just to make is that this is final stage interview, which could be a standalone process, or it could be as part of an assessment centre. A few brief introductions before we get stuck into the content. So I'm Sophie, I'm MD here at SRS. We work with employers and universities within graduate recruitment and employability. So we support employers by designing their assessment materials and helping them to recruit their graduates. And we work with universities on a number of different employability initiatives. We run assessment centre simulations for universities, which are great fun. If we're not already connected, I'd love to connect with you over on your favourite platform, and you can see my social media handles on the screen. Helen?
Hi, so I'm Helen, University Partnerships Manager for SRS. Again, I'd love to connect with you as well if you want to reach out on LinkedIn or another social media platform. I support Sophie in delivering these webinars, workshops or assessment centres. I hope you find this one useful.
Thanks, Helen. And at various points in the webinar series, we will be joined by experts in graduate recruitment to hear their valuable insight and top tips. Today, we have some advice from Makar Smith. Makar is currently Regional Recruitment Manager for Dunnhumby and based in Bangkok. He's worked within recruitment and specifically graduate recruitment for Dunnhumby, Expedia, Deutsche Bank and Agoda. So he has loads of useful and relevant experience. I'm going to hand you over to Helen now because Helen is going to be taking the lead for this session.
Thanks very much, Sophie. So you'll see from the agenda that we're going to look at how to prepare for that final interview, be it video or in person, the different types of questions, how to really stand out and make an impact, and how to manage your nerves. But before we go into any kind of detail, let's hear from Makar Smith on what to expect at this stage.
Hi there, I'm Makar Smith. I'm the Dunnhumby Regional Recruitment Manager in Asia Pacific. I'm here to talk to you about your final interview, a couple of ideas on what you might expect, and a couple of thoughts on what you can do to prepare. So you're at your final stage interview now, and very well done for getting to this point. You'll probably be interviewing for around 45 minutes to an hour with a more senior member of the organisation. Try and find out a little bit about their background if you know in advance who you'll be interviewing with. Try and understand from the recruitment team what they're going to be looking for at this phase. It's not a gimme, you're not over the line until you've actually been successful at the final interview stage. So prepare thoroughly for an intense and rigorous interview.
Thanks very much to Makar there. So you're buzzing from having successfully already completed so many stages of the recruitment process, whether that's telephone or video interviews or psychometric tests. And you've now reached that last and crucial stage of the process, the final interview. I did want to start by saying that certainly some of the larger employers have actually removed this part of the process so as to help reduce the unconscious bias of interviewers. However, it is still broadly used, and as Sophie said, it can be a standalone event or it can be part of an assessment centre. So with regards to the format of this interview, it will be done via video or in person, and one student actually drew attention to the fact that at the moment, some employers are actually giving candidates a choice. If this is the case, then it's really up to you which of these alternatives is going to make you feel most confident and comfortable. You certainly won't be penalised for whichever one you pick. But if it is possible for you, I'm probably inclined to choose an in-person interview, where it's that bit easier to make a personal connection with your assessor. In terms of who interviews you, it can vary widely depending on the organisation and the role. Broadly speaking, your earlier interviews will likely have been conducted by someone from the HR or graduate recruitment team. And in most cases, these will have been one-to-one interviews. For the final stage, you might have a panel of interviewers or anywhere between 1 to 3 separate one-to-one interviews, particularly as it can be harder to have a panel of interviewers all on the same video platform. Now, your interviewers might still include someone from HR, but you're likely to be interviewed by more senior people. And if you haven't already, your potential line manager could be one of them. For technical positions, you're also likely to be interviewed by someone with experience in this area. Now, the interview is also likely to be a lot longer than the ones you've had previously, usually between 45 minutes up to an hour. And you're also likely to get asked some of the same questions, such as tell us about yourself and why you want to work for the organisation. Now, it's okay to give the same answers, particularly as your reasons for wanting to work for them probably won't have changed. However, you may need to go into more detail. But before we go into specific types of questions, let's look at how best to prepare. As you should have already done before reaching this stage, really research the organisation and get to grips with their values and culture. Ideally, you want to speak their language and allow some of these values to filter through into your answers. Secondly, check their social media and have a broad understanding of what their current priorities are. You may also be asked questions about your understanding of the industry they work in, and so look into potential issues and trends, be able to identify their main competitors. Review the job description and make sure you're very familiar with the requirements and responsibilities of the role. Identify the key skills and experience they're looking for and be ready to answer questions about how you have these same key skills. You should also try to find out who is interviewing you, because you may be able to link in with them beforehand and do some background checks on their experience and what they're particularly interested in. Now, it's impossible to predict every question that you'll be asked in an interview. However, you can and should prepare for commonly asked questions like tell me about yourself or why have you applied for this role. It's also a good idea to think about 5 to 6 key examples or achievements that you could use to answer different questions. So thinking about being part of a football team, for example, you could actually use this to answer questions about teamwork, resilience, leadership, or even influencing others by just changing the focus of your answer slightly. The more unique the examples, the better, although clearly if you have relevant work experience, then you should definitely draw on this. But that's a key part of the preparation for an interview, would be to think about those 5 to 6 key examples or achievements that you can flesh out with detail around the different things you did as part of that and how it matches to those different skills and questions that you could be asked. Finally, make sure you've prepared your own killer questions to ask at the end of the interview, and we'll go on to talk about this a bit later. Remember to take care of yourself. So the night before your interview, you want to make sure that you get lots of sleep, avoid alcohol, and prepare your outfit. And on the morning of your interview, make sure you've had a nice healthy breakfast and avoid too much caffeine. Set yourself up to be the best you can be for the day ahead. In terms of what to have with you, it's good to have a drink or a bottle of water to hand, and also to have a notebook and pen in case you need to jot some things down. Have the job description or person specification handy, along with any academic or training certificates that the interviewer might like to see. It's also worth having easy access to your CV in case you need to refer to it. And for in-person interviews, some employers may also ask you to bring along your right to work ID, usually your passport or some other form of photo ID. What to wear? So most assessment centres and job interviews are considered formal, so I recommend wearing a suit unless directed otherwise. You want to stand out for the right reasons, not your fashion sense. Keep your outfit simple and conservative, stick with grey, navy or black, and avoid those bright, garish colours. When it comes to bags, shoes, ties, scarves and tights, it's best to play it safe. Keep these things muted and make sure they coordinate with your outfit. I'm about to share some top tips for both women and men, bearing in mind that some of them are more relevant for those in-person interviews. Now, I know the more formal approach sounds a little boring and conventional, but it's your personality that needs to shine through at the interview, not your clothing. But whatever the industry, always check with the employer if you're unsure. It's far better to ask and be prepared than to feel totally uncomfortable and out of place, because this will put you off your game and make you stand out for all the wrong reasons. You may also find some of this advice irrelevant if you're applying for a job in the creative industry, for example, such as fashion or design, because in that situation, you would be expected to stand out for your fashion sense and be on trend. So tips for women. Don't overdo the jewellery. Keep heels to an appropriate height, no more than 3 inches. Make sure you aren't showing too much cleavage and wear tights, even if it's summer. And if you wear a dress, make sure it's smart and mostly one solid colour. Also keep makeup and nail varnish subtle and understated. Tips for men. So ties should be low-key. Avoid those comedic or character prints. Choose a plain shirt. White, pale blue or light grey are the most appropriate. And make sure it's ironed. You can still tell if someone's wearing a crease shirt on a video interview. Fasten the top button of your shirt and keep your tie knot tight to your neck. Wear smart shoes and coordinate with a matching belt, something that will go well with the traditional suit colour. And ensure your suit or shirt fits you well. There's nothing worse than wearing a suit that's 2 times too big and looks like your older brother's hand-me-down. I'm now going to hand you over to Sophie to talk through some of the different types of questions.
Thank you, Helen. So first up, competency-based interviews. So these can also be known as structured, behavioural or situational interviews, and these are designed to test several skills or competencies. The interviewer will have a list of set questions and will compare your answers to predetermined criteria. These interviews work on the basis that past behaviour is the best indicator of future performance. They're used by employers across all sectors, but are particularly favoured by large graduate recruiters as part of their assessment centre process. The competency-based interview is systematic and each question targets a skill needed for the job. Some key competencies regularly used by employers are shown here on the screen. You'll need to answer the questions in the context of previous experience or real-life events. The skills being tested will largely depend on the job that you're interviewing for and the sector or industry that you'll be working in. You should expect questions to open with things like, tell us about a time when you, give an example of, or describe how you do. You'll be best placed to answer these types of questions using the STAR technique, which is one that we keep coming back to in our webinars because of how important it is to use it. As a brief recap, the STAR technique follows the model as you can see on the screen. So you follow it with starting out with the situation, talk about the situation to set the scene, move on to the specific task and what needed to be done and why, your action that you took, what you actually did, the result, ideally with something tangible there that illustrates that well, and final R there is reflection. So what did you learn? What would you do differently? That sort of thing. So an example of the STAR technique in practice could be that you were working in a busy restaurant as a part-time job. That was the situation. The task, your role was to greet customers and to seat them. But on a particular day, you had a number of waiting staff had called in sick, and so you had to do 2 roles. So you had to still be the host and greet the customers, but also you had to support some of your colleagues by serving the tables as well. So that was the action that you took. So you worked together as a team, and the customers that attended on that day didn't realise that you were all understaffed and you were all kind of running around like chasing your tails. So you worked together really well, and the end result was no complaints. Everyone got served within a good amount of time. Your reflection in that particular example could be that on reflection, you realised it would be really helpful for all members of staff to be trained in all areas of the restaurant, so that when anyone was off sick, you had people that could easily move to other areas. So hopefully that explains how you can use the STAR technique. Okay, so we've just got a little example here of a time when a candidate was being interviewed who was asked about planning. So this was an example of planning, and when the interviewer asked the candidate about it, he had a really clever example there about planning his sister's wedding. So you can see the various things that this candidate had done there, and it gave him a great and unusual example of being a good project manager. Let me have a look at that for a moment. Okay, let's move on now and look at strengths-based questions. So a strengths-based interview allows you to focus on what you enjoy doing rather than on what you can do. The theory is that by matching your strengths to the role, you'll be happier in your work, perform better, learn quicker, and stay with the organisation for longer. Unlike competency-based interviews, strengths-based interviews feel more informal and personal and allow employers to gain insight into candidates' personalities to see if they would be a good fit for the company. It's important to know that strengths-based questions don't have right or wrong answers, but you must answer the questions honestly. Making information up will give the interviewer a false impression of you, and you could get found out later. Interviewers will be taking note of your body language and tone of voice, which can provide insight into your sincerity. If you're genuinely describing something you enjoy, you'll be animated, and your enthusiasm and motivation will shine through. Candidates often get caught out by questions that ask them to identify their weaknesses, so stay away from generic responses. For example, I'm a perfectionist can come across as a little arrogant. Instead, think of things that you've struggled with, show some vulnerability, and select real weaknesses. For example, you could talk about how you coped and what you learned about yourself during the lockdown. Make sure that you explain how you use your strengths to overcome your weaknesses. I'll hand you back to Helen now.
Thanks, Sophie. So asking questions at the end of your interview is just as important as answering them during the interview. It's your opportunity to find out more about the role and the organisation. Now is your chance to quiz the interviewer, obviously in the right way. Demonstrate why you're the most suitable candidate and stand out from your competitors. If you don't ask any questions, you run the risk of the interviewer thinking you're just not interested in the role or that you're not prepared. And make sure you don't ask questions that you can easily find the answers to yourself, or that cover topics which have already been addressed in the recruitment process. So here's some examples of some great questions. Things like, how is performance measured within the role or organisation? How would you describe the organisation's working environment and culture? What are your expectations of the successful candidate within the first 3 months of them being in the role? Or something like, I've seen from your website that you plan to expand your market share in such and such by 20%. Can you tell me more about this? Here are some examples of questions to avoid. What is the salary for this position? What holidays would I be entitled to? What does your department do? When can I start taking time off? These are all questions quite self-interested and self-motivated that you do want to know the answers to, but certainly at a later stage when you're in that position to negotiate and find out more about the job. Also things such as what does your department do? Hopefully you should know the answer to that by this point. So you don't want to show that you have a lack of knowledge in that area. Here are some simple ways to make an impact and stand out to your interviewers. Be positive and professional with any staff you meet before or after the interview. And during the interview, avoid talking about any personal problems unless completely necessary, and never talk badly about your previous employers. Answer all questions clearly and concisely, evidencing your most relevant skills, experiences, and achievements. It's okay to pause before answering a difficult question to give yourself time to think, or to seek clarification if you don't understand what the question means. And when answering, take your time. Don't speak too quickly. Pay attention to your body language. If in person, give the interviewer a firm handshake both when you arrive and before you leave the interview. And throughout the interview, remember to smile frequently, make eye contact, and use your hands to emphasize those key points. Don't fidget. You should also show enthusiasm, allowing your personality to shine throughout the interview. Be curious and ask questions at appropriate moments. This will demonstrate that you're genuinely interested in the role and the interviewer. And finally, be memorable. Can you submit a document at the end of the interview? Maybe a 3-month plan outlining what you'd like to achieve in the role. This would really show your enthusiasm and passion and would leave that positive, lasting impression with the employer. Now, it's completely natural to have some nerves before an interview. And nerves can be a positive thing because they can keep you focused and engaged. But what you don't want to do is allow your nerves to get the better of you and ruin your chances of securing that graduate job. So here's some tips for keeping your nerves in check. Practice your responses to typical interview questions, some of the ones we looked at earlier, and get your family or friends to help you if you can. Remember that the interviewer wants you to succeed. They want to find the right person for the position. Don't forget to breathe. And when you breathe deeply, your body relaxes and you're more in control of your thoughts. Don't worry about forgetting things. It's not a memory test. It's okay to refer to some notes. Just make sure that you don't read directly from a script. And finally, remember that it's just a chat. An interview is not an interrogation. It's a conversation about you, a topic you know all about. We'll now hear some more from Maka with his top tips for that final interview.
My advice on the final stage is quite short and sweet. Continue to do what you've done to get to this point. That's what the organisation like and they want to continue seeing. Also, be authentic. Be the person you are. Whilst it's competitive, you don't need to try and be something you're not, or you'll get found out. Good luck.
Thanks to Maka there. So you've completed that final interview. What can you expect after this? You may be familiar with the term ghosting in relation to dating, but the term is now used within recruitment as well. And it refers to that frustrating wall of silence you might hit at any stage of the recruitment process. Now, this silence can be particularly frustrating if you've invested a lot of time with one employer and have made it through their entire process to the point where you're just waiting to hear if you've actually got the job. Now, there could be a number of reasons why you haven't heard back. For graduate roles, there are usually a number of assessment centres, and the employers can't make an offer until the last one's finished. Earlier on in the process, they might have a huge backlog of applications to get through. And from time to time, business priorities change at short notice, as we've seen over the last few months. Hiring plans might get frozen for the sake of cost cutting. The best thing you can do is to be patient. If it really has been a long time since you heard from the employer, and especially if they said you'd hear back from them by a certain time, send a short and polite email to ask when you're likely to hear from them, reiterating that you're keen to secure the role, but also stating that you're managing other applications. It can be hugely disappointing not to receive a job offer, especially if you have your heart set on working for one particular employer, and if you made it to the end of the recruitment process and were actually feeling pretty confident. Sometimes it's just a matter of luck, and in a year where they have more vacancies, you would have been one of those lucky ones. Even though your ego might be bruised and your confidence might have taken a knock, the best thing you can do is request feedback. Now, if you've made it to the last stage of the process, most employers will provide you with feedback on request. Earlier on in the process, they might not give you feedback, or they might offer something generic. But it's always worth asking, because that feedback will help you work out where you can develop and what you can improve. So it's time to consider your options. Are there still schemes and jobs you can apply to? If yes, and they're of interest, get back into that application process armed with your feedback. You might decide to take a break, get an alternative job, and what you do during this time can provide some excellent experience to share the next time you apply for a graduate role or scheme. Now, you can actually reapply to most graduate schemes the following year, and we've met candidates who were unsuccessful that first time, but came back next year and were then offered a position. And we're coming back to that skill which we do talk about a lot in our webinars, resilience, something that employers are looking for. And actually reapplying for the job gives you an opportunity to highlight how you bounced back after a disappointment. Take a look at this advice from an employer before I hand you back to Sophie. Just give you a couple of moments to have a look through this. Okay, so I'll hand you back to Sophie to finish off there.
Thank you. So I hope you found that session useful. Next time for the final session, we will be looking at the transition into the world of work. So you can see there some of the things that we will be covering during this session. Now, you might think that it's not hugely relevant to you right now if you haven't secured a job, but I would suggest that you definitely check it out, and it might well be that you come back to it again at a later point as well. So the resources that we have for this session, we have some sample competency-based interview questions and also some strengths-based questions. So we'll make sure that these are made available to you along with this webinar. And as always, we recommend that you check out what the Career Service are doing. They're doing some wonderful things. So check out what support they are able to offer you. So just to finish off, we've got there the social media handles for both us at SRS and also for your Career Service. So if you're not already following, then do check out the platform that is most relevant to you and hit the follow button. Thanks very much for your participation, and we hope to see you again next time.
Thank you.